if you want to say, his friends that run the gaming commission were no longer there. So he was trying to determine how he could get the government to come in and help him out so he could get it. And so he went to the FBI, and he offered to become an informant, for a better term, for them. And at the same time, he also went to the CIA. And he went to the CIA asking to become, for a better term, a CIA agent where he could meet people and set up meetings and go chat with them about whatever the agency wanted them to talk about. And particularly he mentioned the royal family of England then, that he could get in and meet with the Queen and, the prince and princess and all those people and quiz them on whatever the CIA wanted. Now, the CIA, the FBI thanked him, but they knew so much about him, they said no. And they had enough informants, talking about him and the mob then, so they backed off. But the CIA kindly rejected his offer twice. And the reason being is that they were already dealing with the mob. They'd been dealing with the mob for years. As you know, they tried to set up to kill Castro, and the mob was coming in, and they're supposed to be the ones to do it. And so they already had, if you want to say, a working relationship with the mob. And the CIA, they were concerned that if they brought Sinatra in, somebody may say something to him by accident, and then he would in turn tell the public, go out, and he would get drunk or he'd start bragging, because he was always bragging about the mob guys he knew. He was very interested in them, and a lot of times he wanted, like Bugsy Siegel, he wanted to be Bugsy Siegel way back then. And he admired him to a point that he showed a lot of reverence to him. And in it, Phil Silvers, the old actor, was a friend of Sinatra's, and when they would get together, have dinner in Hollywood or Beverly Hills, wherever, and Bugsy would walk in, they would stand up. They wouldn't just sit down and say, "Hey, Bugsy." They would stand up and say, "Hello, Mr. Siegel, how are you today?" And then he would say, "Fine, Frank, Phil, blah, blah." He'd go about his business. And then we have in there about, Phil Silver's wife was talking about that, how they just, both of them admired Bugsy, and they always talked about him. And some of the things they talked about, they wondered, did he prefer to shoot people or did he prefer to kill them with an axe? Things like that they were very interested in. And probably in some ways they were a bit frightened too, because they were bumping into him. So that kind of swings into all the CIA stuff and the FBI stuff that he was involved in, but it was primarily to get help getting his gaming license back.
It would seem, too, that he would be a bad candidate for that kind of work because he's so open to blackmail himself. He had such a crazy reputation, get into fights all the time, prostitution, all this weird stuff with these guys. You hear these stories about Sammy Davis Jr. and the stuff he was doing. He must have been open to blackmail himself. Did he ever get, sued and have to pay those big settlements and stuff,
Well, there were some suits that were filed over the years, and that's a lot of other things were just settled very quietly through his attorneys. Somebody would, there's a woman regarding rape. She went to an attorney. That attorney went to his attorney in Beverly Hills, and they worked out a deal, and it never went anywhere. And so it was pretty well kept quiet. It was buried, but there was a lot of that going on. With his attorneys burying things, and he had a couple, one in Nevada, the William Raglio, and then Redmond in California, that were his troubleshooters.
Right.
And if something came up, they're the ones that would theoretically take care of it. But Frank was never one to keep his mouth shut, and either because he thought he was untouchable, which, he was most of his life. He was untouchable, or that he thought he was so brilliant that he could say things and it wouldn't come back to haunt him. But the problem was a lot of times when he said things, it found its way back to the FBI or to like LAPD intelligence because of the series of informants that they all had out there. And so he was, in a sense, a loose cannon, and that's why the mob didn't want to do a lot of his bidding, and CIA too. They said, no, he's too much of a loose cannon. He may get drunk or get angry, and who knows what he's going to say.
Now, I know you just worked on a book about Marilyn Monroe,
right.
Bombshell, the night Bobby Kennedy killed Marilyn Monroe. That whole incident at Sinatra's casino, the Cal Nava.
Right.
Yeah, right. I mean, was he there that night?
Frank?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he was there. And he was there. Sam Giancana was there, even though he says Frank said no, but he was there. And so were a few other lower-level mob guys at the time. And Lawford was there, and, so that came into play because Lawford was acting, for better term, as the middleman between John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy and Frank Sinatra. And also he was the middleman between them, between Robert Kennedy and Jack Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe. So he was always in the middle. And as it turned out, when kind of interesting side story, but Frank was obviously, hopefully in love with Ava Gardner at one time. Mm. And they married, and before that, Peter Lawford dated her, and Sinatra found out, and he called him and basically threatened him, saying, if I ever hear that you're around her again or dating her or whatever, your leg's going to get broken, you're a dead man, and so on and so forth. And that came into his old mob routine where he was taking himself way too seriously, thought he was a mob member, but he probably also thought that he could, at that stage, get some mob guys to come in and, beat Lawford up or, break a leg or whatever. And it's unlikely they would have done that, but you never know.
Now, the book is called Frank Sinatra and the Mafia Murders. What murders were there?
Well, without getting a lot of detail, remember when his son was kidnapped?
Yeah,
Junior?
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah,
right. When he heard about it, his first reaction was not to call the police or the FBI. His first reaction was he called Sam Giancana because he thought that this had to be a mob. Some mob guy somewhere did this to extort money out of him, $250,000. And so Giancana said he'll look into it right away. Frank's second call went to Jimmy the Weasel Fradiano in L.A., and as you know, probably a lot of you listen to, Fradiano was a mob hitman for a while. He was involved in a lot of stuff, then became a government informant. And so Giancana put the word out to his people, and then on the West Coast through Fradiano, to find out who did this, who's behind the kidnapping, because they thought it was probably some, mob guys too, not necessarily in the Mafia, but some low-level criminals and so forth. So they went out looking, and Jimmy found some fellas that he thought, for some reason, and we don't know the reason, but he thought were probably involved in some fashion in this kidnapping. So he went out and got them, and if you want to say interrogated them, and then these people turned out missing. They're just gone. And so there were some things that went down because at that stage, Giancana thought, well, wait a minute, if we help Frank out on this, or you can find out who it is, he's going to owe us big time forever. We'll have a complete lock on him. And as it turned out, it wasn't any mob guys. It was basically some college students decided to pull it off and finally released Frank Jr. down near Los Angeles. And, that's always kind of a strange story, too, because they said they kidnapped him. They drove him in the trunk of a car from Lake Tahoe down to, for better term, Beverly Hills in that area. And then they released him. And instead of going to a house and calling the police, asking for help, but Sinatra Jr. was just walking around, and the security guard stopped him. And he said, he told him what went on, and then the security guard basically got involved. But you would think that if you were kidnapped like that and released, your first call would be to the police or to your own house, tell your mother and so forth, whoever it is, that you've escaped or that they released you or whatever. But that wasn't the case. So there's a real gray area there in everybody's mind who's looked into it. But what went on? Why did he do that?
Yeah, and the defense was that it was some kind of publicity stunt.
Exactly. There's a lot of stories about it. You just don't know.
Yeah. Now, what about his relationship with Kennedy? Especially when you mentioned Sam Giancana, a lot of people believe he was involved in the Kennedy assassination. What about his relationship with Kennedy and these guys who then killed Kennedy?
Well, Sinatra, like I said, he was hooked up with Sam Giancana for quite some time. He was also involved, like a middleman with Judith Exner, who was having a relationship with Giancana.
Right.
At the same time, she was having one with JFK. And the FBI had a wiretap on Giancana's house. And one day, JFK called her at Giancana's house. And the FBI got the recording. And so after that, Hoover called in Robert Kennedy, who was the AG, and said, hey, I want you to listen to this tape. Your brother is talking to this woman. And so he listened to it, and he says, now, that woman is Sam Giancana's girlfriend, and she's right at Giancana's house when your brother called. And so what Hoover did at that time, told him, said, if you mess with me, I'll take you two guys out. I'm releasing the information. So that was changed, but Giancana was always around Frank. Frank was the middleman then before JFK really got elected to the presidency, the middleman between JFK and the mob, mainly Giancana. And he has also served sometime as the middleman even prior to that with JFK's father and Robert's father, because he basically wanted help with the election coming up for JFK. So he did go to the mob, but it was via Frank was helping as being a middleman and, for a better term, a consultant on that, and setting up Kennedy's father with some other people and with the mob, especially in West Virginia, to throw the election. Then also they supplied him. He went up to Cal Neva, and they supplied him with a number of prostitutes, the father. So they were basically locking him down completely. But the father had a reputation already of being a philanderer. It was pretty well out there. But this was the mob doing it.
Just incredible. What a soap opera, like all these, all
these
characters, man.
Real interesting. And then Sinatra, even when he first started out, if you want to say just starting to get known, the Fischetti brothers out of Chicago, the Chicago outfit, they were cousins of Al Capone and working for Al Capone, and they were still in the mob, but he was extremely close to them. And when he would go to, not going to do a show or anything, but he would travel to Illinois, he would stay with them. They would pick him up at the airport or wherever he came in, and he would stay with them at one of their houses. And they would go out drinking together, having a good time, and they were always around him. And he did a lot of favors for the Fischetti brothers, which was always real interesting because they seemed to have a very, very close relationship, not only business relationship in some areas, but also just a very close friendship. And Frank probably looked to them as his, I want to say, guardians or protectors, that if he needed help, and he needed the mob type help, these two guys would